Hello again. I've got a bit of a safety warning for crossbows this time. The other day I was out shooting my Armex Tomcat 2 pistol self-cocking crossbow and the safety catch wouldn't disengage. So the safety catch on this crossbow is automatic. Once you've cocked the crossbow, once the string is back in place in the cocked position, the safety catch here comes back and engages, so you cannot pull the trigger of the crossbow like most safety catches. I then put the bolt into the crossbow, pulling it all the way back to the correct position, and I tried to push the safety catch off to fire the crossbow, but it wouldn't disengage. The crossbow was stuck in the cocked position and I had no way of uncocking the crossbow. Now at this point I was getting a bit worried because I was in my back garden with a crossbow. Now this is quite a low powered crossbow, but even a low powered crossbow can cause a lot of damage. The most important thing was to not actually panic, because when you start panicking with things like this, that's how injury or death happens. The last thing I wanted to do was point the crossbow up like this. Now I'm in quite a bit of Liberia, there's houses all around me. Last thing I wanted to do was to try and figure out how to turn that safety catch off and accidentally point into the air and fire a bolt into my neighbour's garden, potentially injuring or killing someone, or putting a bolt through someone's window. Not only that, there's also a primary school very close to me. The last thing I want is to fire a crossbow into the school grounds. It doesn't matter that the schools are not on right now, it doesn't matter there's no children in there. That's still a terrible thing to do. You can cause a lot of damage, and it's just, well, it's not acceptable to say the least, you know what I mean? As a responsible shooter, you have to make sure your projectiles do not leave your premises. If it goes past your fence, that's it, you've committed a crime. It doesn't matter if you've hurt anyone or not, you've still committed a crime. Even the ricochet is a crime if it leaves your boundaries. So that was extremely important. So what I did was I pointed the crossbow directly at the ground into the dirt, and I tried to turn the safety catch off and I tried to fire it. It wasn't going to happen. So I realised at that point, well, it's not going to turn off. I'm going to have to cut the string, which is something I really didn't want to do. Now, if you know anything about crossbows or archery, period, you'll know that there's a lot of tension on these limbs, even when it's not cocked. Even in this position, there's a lot of tension. In fact, it's quite a difficult thing to do just to get the string on, as these limbs are so strong. So what I did was I had no other choice. I put the crossbow in my woodworking vise in the shed, and I actually put on my forestry helmet, which was a hard hat, a visor and ear defenders, and I put all of that on as well as my chainsaw gloves. You might think that's a bit extreme, but I'll tell you something else just in a minute. I took a Mora knife and I stood as far back from the crossbow as I could, and I cut the string. Now obviously the crossbow essentially fired. Now I didn't have a bolt in it, obviously. I used a pair of pliers beforehand to remove the bolt because I didn't want to have my fingers anywhere near this area, because I tried to turn off the safety catch and fire it. For all I knew that it could have fired while my fingers was in this position. So that's why I used pliers, and that's why I had to make sure it was pointing at the ground at all times, as it should be anyway. In fact, when you're not shooting or you're getting ready to shoot, the gun or the crossbow should always be pointed at the ground or at your target and nowhere else ever, especially not near another person or anything you do not want to destroy. So when I cut the string, it essentially fired. The limbs and the string shot forward as it had been fired, and one half of the string went one way and the other half of the string went the other way. Well, I'm glad to say I found the string, and here it is. Now you might not think that looks like a lot, you might think that's not really a dangerous situation. Had there been someone beside me, or had this hit me in the eye, I could almost guarantee you 100% you would be blind. That is more than enough force to take your eye out, especially this bit. I mean, this, you can see how stiff that is. I mean, that's quite a hard piece of string right there. This piece here, not so much, but even that in the eye is enough to cause you very serious injury. In fact, I'm willing to bet if I hit you in the skin, you know, on your arm or anything, that'd be like getting whipped. Which, again, is why I put my chainsaw gloves on. You know what I mean? It's not ideal, but it's better than nothing. Last thing I want is a serious injury or to hurt someone else or kill someone. So even though this is a really, really low powered crossbow, you still have to take a lot of caution and be extremely careful what you're doing with it. And I've got a little story for you. Not a crossbow, but I did see someone using, or playing with a compound bow. He was continuously pulling back the string and letting go the string of the compound bow with no arrow, and I kept telling him, that string is going to snap and you're going to hurt yourself. And he didn't listen. And I'm sure you can see where this is going. He must have fired it about 4 or 5 times without an arrow. I looked away to speak to someone else. Next thing I heard, snap. I looked at him. No points for guessing what happened. He had blood running down his face. The string had snapped and hit him in the forehead, and it was quite a deep gash. He was alright in the end. But that's what happens when you mess around with these things. I told him, if you keep doing that, you're going to hurt yourself and it's going to snap. Snap. Now that was a compound bow. Now imagine what a crossbow could do. And not just this one. I would imagine many crossbows could have this failure. I actually did have a similar failure on one of my bigger crossbows, a much more powerful crossbow. I think it's the Armex. I want to say it's the Armex Hornet. It's a full-sized rifle crossbow, and I think it has about 120 pound draw weight. It fires the larger bolts, the ones that are about this size. I don't know the exact size of the bolt, but I just wanted to put all this out there. You know, be careful with your crossbow. If the safety catch fails, be prepared. You might have to cut the string. Make sure you know this is just my experience. This is not absolute advice. This is just what I did. Honestly, you have to be really careful using crossbows. They are a lot of fun, right? And for the most part, they're very safe. But you have to remember, this thing could cut your finger off. If you put your thumb in this position while you're firing it, that could take your thumb off. No, this could take your eye out, as well as potentially killing someone or someone's pet. The last thing you want to do is put a crossbow bolt through your neighbour's cat and screw them to the fence. You know what I mean? Crossbows in the UK have already got a bad rap for people shooting seagulls, for shooting cats. You know what I mean? You don't want to put a bolt through your neighbour's child and screw them to the fence, because that's just a really bad all-round situation. So please be extremely careful with your crossbow and understand how to use it properly and use a proper backstop. Make sure that bolt is not going to go anywhere you don't want it to go, and always point it at the ground until you're ready to fire it into your target, and never, you know, point it up towards the air, even if it's not loaded, even if it's not cocked and it's not loaded. Just basic safety and common sense. I see nothing wrong with shooting a crossbow in a back garden, and my garden is actually really, really small. Like, I could barely even fit my shed in it. It's that small, but I'm safely able to shoot my crossbow because I've thought about it, and I've got safeguards in place. And if my neighbour is in a garden, I'm not using it. Nothing's going to happen, but it might. You know what I mean? You've got to be prepared. You've got to expect the unexpected. Anyway, I think I've said enough in that regard. I hope you found that useful, if nothing else. Do let me know your thoughts in the comments. And have you had any other failures with your crossbows? Have you had this problem? Have you ever had a malfunction? Have you ever been hit by a string? Have you ever fired a crossbow string into your finger? Let me know. I'm curious to know what people are doing with their crossbows. But I hope everyone's being safe and responsible and learning how to use them beforehand. There's plenty of videos on YouTube discussing safe handling and shooting of crossbows. And I know it sounds unmanly and all the rest, and boring, but for God's sake, if you're new to crossbows, or even if you're not, even if you're used to them, please read the manual. You know what I mean? I always read the manual because it's just not worth it. In fact, on that note, you see these little notices, these little warnings on the limbs of the crossbow. Most of them have it. I know that's pointing at me, but you know what I mean, the string's not backing. Anyway, there's a warning here and a warning here. Read it and understand it. Anyway, enough said. I'll see you later. Wait a minute. There's two important things I forgot to say there. Number one, I highly recommend that you should wear shooting goggles while firing crossbows. Now, I know the chances of the bolt coming back and hitting you are far lower than if you're shooting, say, an air rifle or a firearm or an airsoft gun, but it can still happen. But not only that, that's actually not why I wear safety goggles. That's actually a secondary concern. For me, the primary concern is actually the string. As I already discussed, the string can snap. Think about how close that string is to your face, especially if you're using a cheek rest like this. This is a pistol crossbow, but it does have a really small stock. So really, your face, your eyes are really close to the string. And if that was to break, there's a huge potential for that string to come back and hit you in the eye. And the other thing that is equally as important, and it should tell you this in the manual if I remember correctly, inspect the limbs. Periodically you should inspect the limbs all over on your crossbow, both sides, to make sure that it's not broken, cracked, you know, in any way damaged. Because if it is, it will fail on you, it will break, and you will get a serious injury, and you might hurt someone else in the process. Now, dry firing a bow or a crossbow can cause the limbs to break, if not the string. So it's a good idea to check the limbs, and that's the first thing, or one of the first things that I did once I had to cut the string on this crossbow. I had to have a good look around it to make sure I see no signs of damage, and thankfully I don't. But if I did see signs of damage on the limb, I would just replace the limb, because it's not worth the injury, not in the slightest, and it's certainly not worth injuring someone else. Right, I think that's the last thing this time. I'll see you later.